Canada is an enormous place. The second largest country in the world, with roughly 35 million Canadians stretched out across its landscape, there are more unique communities, breathtaking landscapes, and interesting geographical features than in many other countries. It'd be impossible to cover each and every one in a single book, let alone in a single video like this one. Instead, this lesson will explore just a few of Canada's most important physical and human characteristics, the things that have helped make Canada the country it is. If you've ever watched a Canadian TV show or been to Ottawa or Montreal, the first thing that probably struck you was Canada's bilingualism. Indeed, although more than 4/5 of the country speak English, a vocal and important minority of Canadians speak French as their first language. This is due largely to historical accident. French exploration and subsequent colonization of the New World centered on the St. Lawrence River, the large waterway that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. When New France, as this colony was called, was handed over to the British after the French and Indian War ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763, the British rechristened it the province of Quebec. Despite friction with its new British rulers, the Quebecois maintained their language and many of their French customs. As a result, competing systems grew up in Canada through Canadian Confederation in 1867 and on to today. For example, Quebec's legal system was built, and largely still functions on, French common law, while the rest of Canada was built and based on English common law. The friction between English and French speakers in Canada continues to shape politics in the country. Quebec, for instance, held referendums in 1980 and 1995 when Quebecers narrowly decided to remain part of Canada and not declare their independence. Though the 21st century has seen considerably less friction, the Bloc Québécois, for instance, the political party favoring Quebec independence, won only 4 seats in the 2010 federal elections. Anglophone-Francophone animosity remains an issue just below the surface in Canadian society. Another group that often considers itself disadvantaged in Canada is Aboriginal or First Nations people. These are people who descended from native tribes who lived in Canada long before the arrival of European colonists. According to the 2011 census, Aboriginal people make up 4.3% of the Canadian population, though issues with underreporting and misrepresentation likely push this number higher. Aboriginal people live throughout all of Canada, from Iroquois tribes in Ontario and Quebec to coastal tribes in British Columbia to the descendants of Inuit in the Canadian Arctic. Aboriginal people make up a comparatively larger portion of the population in Canada's northern provinces. For example, more than 50% of the Northwest Territories considers itself Aboriginal. While some Aboriginal people choose to live within normal Canadian society, much of the Aboriginal population chooses to live with other descendants of their tribes or bands on reservations. These Aboriginals on reservations receive numerous benefits because of their Aboriginal status, such as lower taxes, subsidized housing, and Aboriginal communities often have greater independence than other Canadian communities. For example, they are often recognized as separate nations existing inside of Canada and not necessarily a part of the country. Despite these benefits, Canada's Aboriginal population has faced historic persecution and hardship at the hands of European colonists and later the Canadian government. For example, many Aboriginal children as late as the 1950s were forced to leave their families and go to residential schools where assimilation into white Canadian society was harshly and at times violently forced upon the children. Angst against these past and current injustices periodically erupt in protest, such as the 2012-13 Idle No More movement, which saw Aboriginal people across the country join in demonstrations aiming to raise awareness about Aboriginal issues. Of the physical characteristics of Canada, from the Rocky Mountains to the Canadian Shield to the rocky Atlantic island Newfoundland, perhaps none are shaping Canada more than the oil sands deposits in northern Alberta. Due to the 20th century's high price of oil and breakthroughs in oil extraction technology, Alberta's previously unusable bitumen deposits have turned into a cash cow. Indeed, Canadian oil remains the country's most profitable export and has driven the Canadian dollar to near par with the US dollar. This physical feature of Alberta has also changed its demographics. The Alberta oil patch has attracted workers and capital from across Canada to the region, and cities in northern Alberta, like Fort McMurray, have experienced rapid population growth, on the order of 5 to 7% per year. This, in turn, has driven up housing and home prices in the region. The importance of Alberta's oil patch to the Canadian economy was best demonstrated when the global price of oil plummeted in late 2014 and early 2015. When this happened, Alberta oil production slowed as high-priced extraction techniques became less profitable. In less than a year, the Canadian dollar went from being worth roughly the same as the US dollar to being worth around 75 to 80 cents. We'd be hard-pressed to write a lesson highlighting a few of Canada's physical characteristics without highlighting its largest, the Arctic. Though very few Canadians actually live in the Arctic, the northernmost region of Canada and its Arctic islands make up over 40% of the country's landmass. The region receives little rainfall, and north of the Arctic Circle experiences month-long periods in the summer and winter when the sun doesn't set and never rises respectively. As you might imagine, it's very cold here. Daytime temperatures only get above freezing for several weeks during the Arctic summer. Though only about 100,000 Canadians live in the Arctic, the region is increasingly important to the rest of Canada. As global warming melts more Arctic ice and new Arctic shipping lanes are made possible, Canada's control of and role in the Arctic has become an important question. As you can see, we didn't touch on everything. We completely missed the Canadian prairies, the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and the fascinating history of the Acadians in Nova Scotia. We did, however, touch on some of the most important human and physical characteristics of Canada today. After all, both the English-French divide and Aboriginal rights have been important issues in Canadian history and remain ever present today. Furthermore, the Alberta oil patch remains a driving force behind the Canadian economy, while the Arctic, one of Canada's largest regions, remains a source of possible 21st century economic expansion.